America has always had an innate fascination with scandal. Tabloid drama is not a 21st century occurrence. There's an old saying that still waters run deep, and early San Pedro is no exception. History can be a two-sided coin, and every city has a notorious story to tell. I'm James Ramirez. Welcome to PortFolio.
They all seemed to have brothels nearby or knew where they were at.
San Pedro, its reputation as a rough town, well, yeah, a lot of things did happen down here. Rather notorious in some ways.
Everybody knew whose territory was whose, and it was sort of a balance of power.
His daughter kind of scandalized the family name by her behavior.
Let a Los Angeles housewife tell you about it.
FBI agents came in and started removing the fathers from the home.
She was a prisoner that thought a great deal of herself.
When Phineas Banning left home at the age of 13, he had 50 cents in his pocket. By the time he was in his 30s, he had established one of the largest ports in the world, the Port of Los Angeles. The port brought continued growth to the surrounding areas, including the city of San Pedro. Phineas Banning had 5 children, the youngest of which was Lucy Banning, born in 1876, said to be one of the most beautiful women in all of Southern California. Lucy was never short on suitors, or husbands for that matter. The Victorian era yielded strict rules regarding marriage. The unions were less about love and more about business deals. And Lucy dabbled in a little bit of both. Her first husband was a young attorney named John Bradbury, son of real estate and mining tycoon Lewis Leonard Bradbury.
I'll go all around the world for you. Anything you want, we'll do. It's undeniable, it's true devotion.
I don't believe Lucy heeded anyone's advice from the day she was born. With all her thoughtfulness and kindness, she had one great weakness: men. To phrase it very delicately, she was man-crazy. Rebecca Lee Dorsey, the family physician.
After 4 years of marriage, Lucy ran off with a man she had met at a party, only to be retrieved by her husband and ultimately forgiven.
John Bradbury of Los Angeles, California, the millionaire whose pretty wife recently eloped from that town with H. Russell Ward, a middle-aged Englishman, and repented after she and her associate had both been arrested in San Francisco, is in this city. Mrs. Bradbury, who has been released on her own recognizance, is now en route for the East to meet her husband here and effect a reconciliation, while Ward is held in default of $2,000 bail. Reporter for the New York Times, July 14, 1897.
Divorced in 1902, Lucy married actor Mace Greenleaf, only to abandon him for the arms of another man. After several affairs and marriages, Lucy finally settled on Setsuzo Ota, aka the Professor, a noted Japanese wrestler. He would be her 4th husband.
Yeah, the story is that one day she used to go out to White Point, a historic site here in our fair town, and showed up there with Mr. Togo was Japanese, and she was running around with a Japanese fellow. In fact, I think they even traveled together. A notorious sort of thing for such a prominent family.
It was notorious because in 1926, interracial marriage was banned in 28 states, and California was one of 7 whose statutes prohibited marriage between whites and Asians. Lucy challenged that statute by eloping to Seattle. She was 51, he was 31. Otto was Lucy's final husband. She died of pneumonia on February 20th, 1929, shortly after their honeymoon voyage. In the end, Otto only received a portion of Lucy's estate, and 20 years later, he was one of 9 convicted in the extortion and kidnapping plot of mob boss Hideshi Yakamoto. Beacon Street. Today, little is left of its past. However, from the late 1800s to well into the 50s, it had earned a reputation of being the toughest 4 blocks on Earth.
That was the toughest, roughest 4 blocks in the world. Went way past Marseille or Algiers or Hong Kong. China. It was a tough street.
Back to 1881, there was a group of women who decided that they wanted to clean up Beacon Street. And so they began the Social Service Society. And their main objective was to get the bars closed at midnight. And so they had an election. At that time, the population in 1881 was 200. And when they took the vote, it was 106 to 2 not to close the bars at midnight. All the people who wanted them open till 2 o'clock in the morning obviously had a reason.
Beacon Street's most lucrative time was during World War II.
The military personnel who had a steady income, they knew that they had money, which the local people didn't always have, so that they could be enticed into the drinking and the gambling.
The West Coast Navy fleet was here, and also the Fort MacArthur. So in town would come soldiers and sailors frequenting the bars in town, because at one point in time there were 15 in that area. And so can you imagine some of the fights that went on? The fun thing for me was, as a youngster, to go to the Monday morning courthouse to see all the activities that were going on and the number of people who were picked up for fighting or drunkenness or all kinds of interesting things.
Every vice imaginable was up for grabs on Beacon Street.
Everything, prostitution, booze, illegal booze. There was everything that is illegal was being done on that street. The police could never control it, so they just managed it. They sort of looked the other way.
In those days, you didn't always call yourself a bar. You certainly didn't say that you had a brothel upstairs. But if you were advertising in a certain area and you said that you were a cafe, but you don't offer much in the way of food, everybody knew what kind of on Beacon Street, they would know what kind of a establishment you were running. They didn't have to have it spelled out.
There were also gambling went on, and also bookies.
In the basement, and there are many basements in this area, including Beacon Street, a business area. They were also used for the gambling, and then the upper floors were used for the brothels.
And one of the biggest problems usually is when the bookie couldn't get his money, so you had to have the arm breaker. We had Freddie the Hat, who was the arm breaker on Beacon Street.
There was always a lot of payoffs going on. You know, if you had a place like that, you would probably want to protect it, and you'd pay off a few officials, and things would just go along merrily as could be.
Shanghai Red. It was a bar that had earned the reputation of being one of the toughest waterfront bars in the world. Named after its owner, Shanghai Red, aka Charles Oliver Eisenberg, Red was a large, imposing figure who ran his tavern with an iron fist and a soft heart.
Shanghai was a big guy, and he had hands like hams. He had giant hands, and he was always, you know, he'd get the sailors drunk, he'd take them for what they had, and when they passed out and needed food in the morning, he'd give them food and he'd give them a taxi cab fare to get home. Meantime, he'd fleeced them.
To keep order, Red hired large, imposing women to act as bodyguards.
They were tattooed. Sweet and Sour was tattooed, and she was happy to show her tattoos to anyone coming into Red's bar. They were just rough and tumble women. I mean, you know, really interesting. You don't want to cross a bouncer on Beacon Street. For some reason, Shanghai Red, liked women bouncers, and he kept them working all the time. Periodically, looked down the street and someone was flying out of the door of one of the bars. They'd throw them out bodily.
Shanghai Red died in 1957, and with his death, the infamous reputation of Beacon Street began to fade.
He died behind the bar of a heart attack, and we put a giant black wreath on the door of his saloon that day. And in the chapel, where a few words were said about him, were these rows and rows of these girls that worked on the street just crying because they loved him so much. Just tears streaming down their face. They're all women of the night, B-girls or whatever you want to call them.
The clients that once kept Beacon Street bustling eventually disappeared. The military fleets relocated to Long Beach. Canneries closed and the workforce went with them. The bars and restaurants that once illuminated Beacon Street shut their doors. In the 1970s, the old buildings were eventually demolished to make room for what was considered a revitalization of downtown San Pedro.
And I, to this day, feel that the powers that be should have kept the old buildings, should have made it a place that people could come to see what it was during its heyday, instead of what we have down there now are concrete and steel with no character. Beacon Street had character.
I hope you enjoyed the Notorious side of PortFolio. Thanks for watching.
Notorious.